Good morning. If anyone doesn't have a seat yet, we've got plenty of options over here to my right, your left. Welcome. Good morning. Welcome to Google. My name is Jason Jang. I'm from the Google's Trust and Safety team. And on behalf of Google and Defending Digital Campaigns, we'd like to welcome you to the Campaign Security Summit. I'm going to leave it to Michael Kaiser, who's following me, to set the stage for why we're here, what we're after this morning. But let me do a little bit of housekeeping, if you will. If you haven't found it already, we do have open Wi-Fi at Google Guest. There's no password required. We're going to go straight until about 12:15 this afternoon without a formal break, but feel free to come and go as you need. There are exits on either side of the room. The restrooms are immediately behind you, and we'll continue to have coffee service just outside, so make yourselves comfortable. We have a truly fantastic lineup today of speakers, including experts from across industry, government, campaigns, and those that support them. Today is a bit of a rare convening of practitioners from across the political spectrum, and we're proud of this. That's by design. Our goal today is to have a positive and constructive conversation. And for that reason, we've asked all the panelists and speakers to hang up any team jerseys that they might typically wear and speak with the spirit of facing shared challenges and seeking shared solutions. And I'll ask all of you in the audience to do the same. You might have some opportunities to ask questions of the panelists if time permits. With that, I'd like to introduce Michael Kaiser, the President and CEO of Defending Digital Campaigns, Google's partner in helping keep campaigns safe, and our co-host for the summit. Michael, come on up.
Jason, good morning. Oh, come on. Come on, man. Good morning. There we go. Let's get in the spirit. I'm assuming people are properly caffeinated for this day, and that's great. As Jason said, I'm Michael Kaiser. I'm the President and CEO of Defending Digital Campaigns. And let me just start by saying how happy I am to be here today. We have partnered with Google on campaign security for quite a while now, since our inception back in 2019. And it's just, it makes me very proud and to be sitting here with, the Google and Defending Digital Campaigns working together, trying to, and modeling for everybody how this has to all be collaborative. So I just want to also just a shout out to the Google Civics team, to Erica, to Maureen, to Natalie, to the folks who worked, and folks like Jason, who worked really hard to put this together. This is a team effort across the board, and a lot of people have been extremely helpful in making this come together today. So thank you all. To the DDC team who's here, Julia and Ashton as well. So what is DDC? Who are we? We're Defending Digital Campaigns. We were founded with a singular purpose: to protect our democracy in a bipartisan, non-aligned way, to work with campaigns we take tools from folks like Google and other companies that we give to campaigns. We give those to campaigns so that they can implement better cybersecurity, but we do it in a way that was not allowable in the past. The Federal Election Commission, our founders, who include people like Robbie Mook, who ran Hillary's campaign, and Matt Rhodes, who ran Mitt Romney's campaign, went to the Federal Election Commission and said, campaign cybersecurity is a national security issue. Campaigns won't pay for cybersecurity tools and probably shouldn't pay for tools, right, to be protected. And we think that they should be allowed to take those tools from an organization like DDC and not to have to count them as contributions. And that's what we do. So we take various tools of all different kinds. We give them to campaigns. We don't just land them on the desk. We help them implement them. We have an onboarding team that helps them get those tools up and running, because a lot of campaigns don't have that sophistication. So that's what we do. We work with campaigns on the left, on the right. Right now, we work mostly at the federal level. The FEC obviously is the Federal Election Commission, and they determine federal campaign finance law. But we are working our way to get approved in states. I'm sorry to say we're not yet approved in Texas, but we are approved in Ohio, Georgia, and Virginia to start moving down the ballot, right? To start work, with statewide races, with state ledge races, with mayoral races, right? With county commissioner races, because the attack surface in the campaign space is gigantic, and it's actually bigger below the federal. I mean, we all think of presidential campaigns, obviously very important, but at every level there are campaigns, and all that in cybersecurity terms is an attack surface, right? And we just want to make sure that that surface is extremely well protected. So that's what we do. You'll hear more about us today. You'll hear more about some of the tools that we implement. And I just want to again thank Google for the partnership. It's been essential in doing everything that we do, especially right now in the height of a presidential election year. So now it's my real honor to introduce the Honorable Will Hurd, Congressman, former Congressman from Texas. He's a San Antonio native. You all know him. He's from Texas. You probably know him better than I do because he's from Texas. He studied computer science, which I think is essential to the discussion we're having today at Texas A&M. He was a CIA officer, a cybersecurity executive, a congressman, as we know, artificial intelligence policy pioneer, author, investment banker, and a presidential candidate. Served in the CIA overseas, where he thwarted terror threats, helped build Fusion X to combat cyber adversaries. In Congress, he addressed critical national issues from AI, which is going to be a big topic of conversation today, and to the new Cold War. And he serves as the managing director at Allen & Company, a board member of OpenAI, and a trustee of the German Marshall Fund. So that's kind of the resume. But let me add one thing here that I think is really important to note. Sometimes when we talk about cybersecurity, we think it's about, people, process, machines. That's kind of a framework. Software and hardware you have to put in place, right? But the fact is that one of the most essential elements of cybersecurity is leadership. And Congressman Hurd embodies that leadership. And he embodies that leadership not only in the legislature when he was a congressperson, but in the boardroom, which is incredibly essential, and also the public square, right? That leadership has to happen across all those things. And Congressman Hurd embodies that leadership in cybersecurity, and it is what helps us be more secure. So I just want to thank you for being here today and welcome you to the summit.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So, for a decade, I recruited spies and stole secrets. And the reason in the CIA you recruit spies and steal secrets is to better understand the plans and intentions of your adversaries. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is why should we care about these topics of cybersecurity and AI from the perspective of our adversary? And when it comes to defending democracy, right, I always go back to the OG election hack. And that was Blacktivist and Southern Pride, or South Pride. If y'all see, these were two organizations that the Russian Internet Research Agency built, ran social media campaigns, was driving hundreds of thousands of people. Commander Oleg was sitting in a place in Moscow talking like he was, supporting the black community in Texas. Right? If you do not know about either one of these campaigns, you should do a little bit of research on this. Another one that they also did a year later was two groups talking about and trying to foment discord on the issue of religion, specifically Islam. Again, pro-Islam group, anti-Islam group. They even created a movement on the ground in Houston where you had dozens of protesters showing up, and that is in the upper right-hand corner. All of this created, orchestrated, and run from Mother Russia. Now, I'm going to play, it's not just the Russians that we have to worry about. I want to play a short video.
A world where information is power, where fact and fiction collide. A digital drumbeat of disinformation from China, the U.S. State Department says, threatening the very fabric of the free world.
有美国的舆论担忧，联邦政府和德州的矛盾或许将演变成美国的内战。
One of Beijing's latest campaigns focusing on Texas, a tidal wave of disinformation surging across social media in China in recent weeks, zeroing in on tensions between Texas and the White House over illegal migrants spilling over the border from Mexico.
If Texas declared independence from the United States,
Chinese social media users captivated by videos like this, speculating about Texas declaring independence. Online chatter of a looming U.S. civil war, getting hundreds of thousands of likes, shares, and comments, mostly untouched by Beijing's army of online censors.
This is the dark side of globalization.
And not an isolated incident, the State Department says, releasing its first ever report on what it calls the People's Republic of China's information manipulation.
You look at the pieces.
Why are they doing that? To erode trust in our institutions. This is not about influencing the actual vote count or adding 10 votes here or there. It's to erode trust in our institutions, because when we're battling each other, we're not battling them. And this doesn't just stop at eroding trust. This is again, English language post created by the Russians about Vladimir Zelensky during the Ukraine contest. That is a fake image on the left where they're trying to make it look like Zelensky is making things up. And it's not just the Russians, doing the Russians in English. They're also getting their African allies when they go and visit, if you read that last line, in order to propagate their own positions. So not only are our adversaries trying to erode trust at every level of our institutions, they're also trying to gain support for their individual initiatives. This is about them getting what they want from elected officials. They do not care about the letter after your name. And they're not only just doing this to influence, they're also doing this to understand. This title and the fact that more people weren't freaked out by this, that we know for years that Chinese hackers have been into a number of our critical infrastructure, should be a concern. And not only is it our critical infrastructure, they're targeting all y'all. Now, in the intelligence business, I'll be honest, I didn't give a shit what some politician said in a country that I was posting, because I knew that politician probably had very little impact over that one thing that I was interested in. But the Chinese don't operate that way. The conversations between a staff and an elected official, we don't consider that in the US intelligence community as intelligence. But the Chinese government does. And they collect information, they hold information for some future action, and they're thinking in thousands of years, not just thinking about the next election cycle. So not only are they trying to erode trust and push their agenda, they're also trying to understand their adversary, which is us, the United States of America. Now, what do we do about it? We're having to do all this in an infodemic. You've probably heard that word. Guess what? AI is going to make it even worse. Let's be real frank. I think there's a lot of people that when the information that AI is going to allow us to put out in the ether is going to lead people to do one of three things. They're either going to revert, they're going to go back to things that they already know and people they already trust. They're going to reject straight up, even if the information is true, or they're going to get duped. And this is the reality in which we have to operate. Now, many people think, if this is our information diet, I think of it as a rope, all this information, and we think misinformation and disinformation is all the little strands in blue. We could wring all the little things out of our information diet to have a pure information diet. I actually think that's impossible. I don't think we're going to be able to deal with that, right? But there are a handful of things that we can do in order to not only protect ourselves, but to protect our democracy. And it starts by protect yourself. Don't let the bad guys into your systems. Okay, it's real simple. Don't click on stuff like that. All right? Y'all didn't, guess what? You didn't do that thing on iCloud. You know you didn't do it. So why are you going to click on it? That is a real scam. That is a real tech scam that you should not click on. And 90% of cyber hacks start with a phishing expedition. Don't click on stuff that you didn't do, all right? When I was in the cybersecurity business, we always got in, by the way, right? And there was one time that we were on a very big client, and we were against the clock, and we had a limited amount of time to break into our system. and we created a fake receipt and sent it to somebody, and they clicked on it. So if you don't take anything away from this, right, our friends at Defending Digital Campaigns are going to give you all way more sophisticated tools and way to deal with things. Don't click on stuff from people you don't know. It's okay to ignore it, all right? And number two, half of current attacks that we know could have been defended if your software was up to date. Update y'all's freaking software, y'all, okay? Do it automatically. This isn't hard. If you do these two things, you are protecting yourself, you're protecting your campaign, you're protecting your principal, and you're preventing the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians from gaining access to information they could potentially use in the future. And the last one, be careful of what you're clicking on, right? The bottom thing in the black, I always put, this is not a real ad, so people know it. Right? Maladvertising is something that you don't hear. It's a phrase, it's a term you don't hear that much of, right? But when you're out there, you're browsing, make sure the stuff that you're clicking on is actual real things, right? Go to the real site. So stop clicking on stuff, even when you're browsing, that looks suspicious. You do all these things, you're going to protect yourself, right? And it starts with, to deal in this crazy environment that's only going to get crazier, the one thing you can control are y'all activities and behaviors. And by the end of the day today, y'all are going to learn tools and techniques in order to do that on a macro scale. We all know, I'm showing my age here, I'm a baby of the 80s. We all know the future of cybersecurity is going to be good AI versus bad AI, right? And this is, we always talk about how the bad guys are going to use AI to generate disinformation, to flood the zone, overflow your inboxes, and do bad things, right? But guess what? Use it for good to get the right information out there. If you're not already using AI to generate and to improve and to speed up your own processes, talking about those things that your member is doing, from a legislative perspective, shame on you, right? If you're not using AI to come up with 50 different tweets you can send in one day on one particular topic in order for you to educate the folks that you represent, shame on you. Use AI to facilitate a helpful discourse, and we're going to be able to solve these problems, right? The bad guys aren't necessarily smarter than you. Truth is on your side. You know what you're doing. Use it, harness it, and if you're not, I'm going to come back and slap y'all's hands, okay? And again, today, the folks at Google are going to talk to you about how they think about this information, how they're looking at the policies around how we should be using AI in order to educate folks. It's a tool. Use it. And that's the only way we're going to keep democracy, this little experiment called Democracy Safe. Why was it called an experiment? Because 247 years ago, nobody thought it was going to work. There hadn't been a democracy on our planet for about 2,000 years. Last one was Rome. Julius Caesar screwed that up when he became dictator. The next democracy after us was 60 years later, Switzerland. There's only been 14 countries that have been a democracy for more than 100 years. That's crazy, right? And for us to keep this experiment to work for another 247 years doesn't require the same sacrifices that many of our forefathers and foremothers did. It's not requiring us to battle on the plains of Gettysburg or to hit the beaches of Normandy or to fight in hand-to-hand combat in places like Mazar-e Sharif in Afghanistan. It just requires us to protect ourselves and to use AI to facilitate good conversations so that we keep this experiment going. And I'm thankful that there's organizations like Google and our friends at Defending Digital Campaigns that are making sure you all have the tools in order to do that. God bless you all and good luck.
Terrific, thank you. And good call out on malvertising. It has been a long time since I've heard anybody talk about that, and that, click on the wrong thing and there you go. So thank you for that. So I'd like to welcome David Graff, who is the VP of Global Policy and Standards at Google Trust and Safety. We're going to have a little discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Is this on? Oh, it is on.
It is on.
Good morning, everyone. Okay.
Yeah, grab a seat.
Okay.
So let's just start out with you.
Sure.
Tell us a little
Great place to
about
start.
your history at Google and what's your day job? What do you do?
Sure. Well, my name is David Graff. I'm a vice president at Google. I've been at Google for a little over 9 years now. I work in a department called Trust and Safety, and Trust and Safety is a global organization made up of policy experts, operational experts, enforcement folks who are essentially responsible for sort of enforcing the rules that govern the behaviors and the content that we will show on our various product surfaces. Which means, for better or for worse, trust and safety is often at the center of a lot of, I think, the most significant controversies that Google faces and that also the larger tech companies face. Misinformation, hate speech, extremist content, identity verification of sorts, right? All of these issues are issues that trust and safety deals with. I run something called the Global Policy and Standards team. It's a team of about 250 people spread out across the globe. We are the team that is responsible for writing what we call product policies, so the actual policies that govern on any particular product surface. What is allowed, what is not allowed, what sort of content can be elevated or should be not elevated as much, right? All of those rules, and we do this for all Google products, from all of our monetized products to all of our search-related products to all of our cloud and enterprise-related products across the globe. And then these days, I spend a significant amount of time, as does my team, on generative AI policy. So, it's eventful.
It sounds like you might be busy.
So it is busy, and interestingly, a good thing about the role and about working in this industry is that the issues are always changing, so you're always learning new things and you're always adapting to new situations and meeting new and interesting people, even if they don't always agree with what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of new things, there's been a lot of noise out there about deepfakes, the use of AI, right? It's a lot on people's minds right now. And concern about potentially negative impacts, on the upcoming election. In fact, we did a recent survey with Yubico, which are the security key people, that indicates that actually this is on voters' minds as well. So I think that's important to note, with 78% of them saying they were concerned about impersonation or inauthentic content around this upcoming campaign. So when you look at that threat landscape, what gives you the most concern about that? And how are you thinking, you'll need to evolve your policies to meet this new technological moment that we're in? I'd really be interested to hear
Sure.
how you guys are framing all this and thinking about it.
Sure, it's a great question, and I mean, this is something that we have thought a lot about at Google, and I imagine the other tech companies have thought about this as well. So a couple of things. First, I sort of joked in an earlier conversation that this is a little bit like old wine in new bottle. And all I mean by that is challenges with misinformation, challenges with sort of impersonation, if you will, or other sorts of inauthentic actors, right, have been with us for a while. We at Google, have had a series of policies and had a series of enforcement practices, going back several years now, primarily to address election misinformation. We do that in a variety of ways. On the search side, we try to elevate high quality information about voting processes and procedures. So if you go to Google and you go to Google search and you input a query like, how do I vote? What ID do I need? What time do the polls close, right? We have elevated at the very top high quality authoritative information, so you get the answer that you need. You get the right answer, or the answer that is grounded in the facts. And when we can make sure that you are getting the right information from the right responsible sort of party. In terms of the new technology, though, which is incredibly transformative and incredibly powerful, right? It does present some new challenges. I think people are able to, in a way that they couldn't before, in a way that's fairly frictionless, create high quality video, image, and audio, right, through the use of these tools. So there are a couple of things that we are doing in order to generally, in order to make sure that this technology is not used for nefarious purposes in the election context. So one, from a policy side, one thing that we've done, for example, is that we require, I think we were the first company to roll this out, we require election advertisers to disclose in their election ads when they are using AI-generated imagery, if that imagery or that content is consequential to the claim. And we could talk a little bit more about that, but the short version is trying to carve out things like the basic photoshopping that people do, sort of color correction or red eye removal. We're not really talking about that. But if you're using these tools to create content that is helping you advance the claim that you're making in the ad, you need to disclose that. And you need to be transparent about that so people understand what they're seeing. We're working with lots of different parties and partners around sort of what we call watermarking, essentially using, we have something we call SynthID, but working with an organization called C2PA, I always do that, around standardizing metadata to make sure that when these images are created, there's little bits of code embedded in them that allow us to detect these images, this video at scale, so that we also, there's no question, right, that this particular image was generated through AI. Finally, just in terms of, let's call them foreign actors or adversaries who might try to use our platform and other platforms to try to spread misinformation for their own reasons. In addition to everything I've said, we have had, and we've had this now for 6 or 7 years now, a number of policies in place. One we call the Good Neighbor policy, and I think I'm the one who came up with that, so now I can't criticize it too much. But the idea that on the foreign side and one on the domestic side, where we look to see the various signals that can show that a particular actor is not who they are representing themselves to be. So if somebody creates, I think Congressman Hurd discussed this, if somebody creates a website saying X Lives Matter, right? Or Texas Lives Matter, right? And we look at that website, but you can see all the IP logins are from foreign country X. And that there's other limited information, right? We obviously know that that's potentially problematic and not an authentic site in the sense it's not really being run by somebody from Texas in that scenario. So we have a lot of policies, a lot of enforcement in the area. We have a threat analysis group called TAG that works with lots of different folks across the tech community and also with various government agencies, right, to sort of get signals that help us determine inauthentic actors. So lots of stuff. I feel like I've been rambling. A lot of things. Let me stop there.
Yeah, well, we can come back to some of these too, because I think you touched on some very important points there. And I think one of them is, your example of the website, kind of prompts this next question as well. So 2024, I think how many people here are aware that it's a presidential election year in the United States, right? Yeah,
it is?
It is, yeah. Some of us are a little late to the game, I myself included. But it's, so we know that, right? It's a big year for us. But some people are calling it the election year, period, because, and I have to look at my notes here because I will never remember this. There are 64 countries, 49% of the world's population will vote this year.
Yes.
In the US, 86 of the 99 state legislatures are on the ballot, and that doesn't even include the federal elections, right? The entire House, a third of the Senate, right? And of course, the presidential. So I think there's some, given that huge surface, right, and all of this happening in different countries, I think there's some people are thinking that maybe what we see in other places may get exported here. And I just wonder if you've seen anything, happening that, we could take as like an early warning, or we should have our antenna up about what might happen in the US. I mean, our election's still several months off.
So you were correct that 2024 is a big year for global elections. And at Google, my team is the global policy team, so we are focused on all of those elections. So it is a somewhat daunting task, right? Because as you can imagine, when you are dealing with elections in different parts of the world, you not only have language challenges, you have to have a certain amount of obviously fluency in the local languages, but you need a certain amount of cultural fluency as well to sort of understand the nature of the claims and what is being, in essentially what is being articulated. So it is a big challenge. In terms of things that we've seen, I guess I go back to maybe there's nothing new under the sun, but I've seen a couple of instances where in other countries, people have used the AI tools to create very convincing avatars or replicas of candidates. That's perhaps a loaded word, but an avatar of a candidate. And then use that avatar to and then create a number of speeches, a number of comments on different topics. And then are using that avatar, right, as the stand-in for that candidate in various digital forms. So, and you can imagine you can create, if I'm a candidate, you create an avatar of me, you type in a whole bunch of different topics, you generate a whole bunch of speeches, and then I immediately look like I am talking, right, on a bunch of different topics on various websites, let's say. The question is, I think we have to look, we're looking at that very carefully, how deceptive is that, right? If it's authorized by me and the talking points are things that have been authorized by me, maybe that's okay, but it's also, I think you can make the argument that, perhaps that should be disclosed, right? That this is not the actual candidate speaking, it is a digital representation of the candidate. So I think this is going to be a particular thorny issue. It would be conceptually easier if that digital representation were mouthing falsehoods, then I would say, well, it doesn't matter that it's a digital representation. What matters is the misinformation that's being spread. But if they're not, just then the question is, how do we feel about digital avatars, right? If they are, again, authorized by the campaign, and like a campaign ad, if you're taking responsibility for the things that come out of that digital avatar's digital mouth, then maybe it's okay. So I think that's going to be interesting. I mean, when you think about, and I'll stop this, but when you think about what might happen in the entertainment field, you can see celebrities licensing their likenesses to be used in ads, right, to sell products. Might be great for celebrity. You never have to show up.
Yeah.
Right? You just give them your likeness and they create the ad and you get paid. That's a pretty good model, right?
I could live with that.
Right. No one is asking me to do that, unfortunately.
Me either.
So then the question is, could you do that in the election ads context?
Yeah, I think then that what Bruce Willis didn't he? Kind of, yeah, that was his sort of model. But this is a good segue because we talk and we at DDC try to stay away from what we call in cybersecurity, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? We see actually cybersecurity as enabling you to do the things that you want to do, right? Because good security just allows you to use the technology more robustly. And I think so. Let's segue a little bit to the good stuff about AI, right? Because it's not, in this space, there's a lot of gloom and doom and, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. But this is a powerful tool, right? And we think campaigns in many ways can benefit from using this tool. So have you ever given any thought to way campaigns could actually use AI to pursue their goal, which is usually winning?
Sure. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the technology is tremendously transformative, and I think one of the challenges with the debate that's been happening over the past year, which I understand, is we have tended to focus on the sort of doom and gloom scenarios and not enough about sort of the positive use cases that are really the most immediate ones for campaigns are probably just around analysis and productivity, right? These tools are really good at analyzing and summarizing large documents. So if you are trying to come up with a policy position on something, or you're trying to read a report or something like that, and you have this, it's probably not, it's a 100-page report, right? I've done this before, dropping it into one of the language models and saying, write me a 2-page summary of this document. Now you've grounded the LLM in the document. You're saying, I don't want you to go out on the web and answer a question. I want you to summarize this existing document, which in this case, assume has a high degree of authenticity, right? It's very powerful, very powerful. You get, and I've been using it this way, and you get these summaries, and then that enables you to go back to the larger document. Now you have a framework to sort of analyze it better, or to throw in 2 different documents and say, summarize both of these, compare them, right? Give me the main points of difference between them, right? Maybe even draw me, and then highlight the areas where they agree, right? Tools are really good at that. Or I have used the tools this way. I might write a memo or a report of some kind, You know, we're all busy, so I'm writing something, and then I take it and I drop it into Gemini, and I have to say Gemini, obviously, but you could use another one. You should use Gemini. But I would drop it in there and say, can you rewrite this for clarity? And the model will rewrite it. Now, sometimes I look at it, I'm like, no, that's not what I meant, right? The model, you have to remember that these models are, when it comes to creativity and generating sort of language content, are basically giant probabilistic models. They don't understand fact and fiction, right? And don't really know what you're talking about. They understand the words you said, but they don't necessarily super understand the meaning. So sometimes when it rewrites it, I'm like, no, you missed the point. But sometimes they rewrite it, I'm like, you know what, that's a better way of expressing the point. That's actually, you know, then I get mad at myself for not having written it that way, but using these tools like that, particularly when you are busy. So there's lots of ways that campaigns can use them, I think, to help quickly generate high quality content.
Yeah, I think also we see a lot of, you know, like for example, a fundraising letter. Not that campaigns ever write those. I think we're going to have in a couple minutes, we have some time for questions. So, you know, if you have a question, do we have a central mic, or we're going to pass it around? I don't know what we're going to do here, but if you do have a question, start thinking about it now, and we'd be happy to, you know, engage the audience here. But I have a couple, you know, quick ones, you know, and we can go through. So, you know, when I was introducing Congressman Hurd, I talked about leadership as being an important element of security that people don't always pay attention to. For me, collaboration is just as equal an important thing in cybersecurity. And those of you who are in cybersecurity understand and know how much collaboration happens under the hood, even among competitors sometimes, around securing this larger ecosystem, the whole internet itself, right? It's not really owned by anybody. We all have a responsibility to protect it. I know that Google has joined in a few efforts around AI in terms of collaboration. One being what happened, the agreement that was signed in Munich. I think it was 20 companies that agreed to try and look at ferreting out deceptive information about the upcoming election. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you all work together and why that's so important?
Sure, I agree with you. Collaboration, I think, is very important generally, and it's particularly important when it comes to AI. I mean, this is new technology, tremendously powerful technology that honestly is now out in the wild. And we all of us, and that includes the tech companies, need to take responsibility for that, and we need to work together to make sure that it's deployed safely. So, you know, from Google's perspective at least, you know, going all the way back to 2018, we published a series of AI principles. We were very transparent about how we thought about the technology and how we wanted to approach it and what we thought the guardrails were. If you roll forward from that date, you know, we've had a series of sort of collaborative initiatives, starting with the White House commitments on AI, rolling forward to things like the Frontier Foundation Forum, where we are working together with other companies to talk about sort of we call base model training and what these early models should look like and how they should be trained and the data that they should ingest. To things like the Munich Security Accord, which is very specific to AI and elections, where a number of companies, it was around 20, right, got together and basically said, you know, we want to make sure that these AI tools are not used to spread election misinformation, so we're going to have policies against that. We're going to work on ways to detecting this sort of content at scale. We're going to be transparent with the public about what we see and what we're doing, right? You know, all designed to foster trust, frankly, to both prevent abuse, but also to foster trust, a slightly different thing, so that people use these products, they understand that the companies behind them are committed to making sure that they don't contribute to harm, and particularly that they don't amplify election misinformation.
Yeah, I think the trust word doesn't get used enough, actually. I actually think, you know, when I was working at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, you know, we always talked about a safe, secure, and trusted internet, because that is really a critical component of all of this. That's what underlies. Like, you're not going to use, you know, if your car, you know, had a 10% chance of, you know, turning off in the middle of the highway every time. Well, it's 90% of the time it's great, but 10% of the time it's not good. You just wouldn't trust it. You wouldn't use your car. And I feel the same way about the technology, that trust really underlies a lot of what we're all trying to do here, right?
Right.
And those kinds of things. The little editorial from me. I don't know if there's any questions. We have a question right here. Okay, thank you. Just say who you are, and that would be great.
Yeah. This is on?
Yeah.
Gamba from Credo AI, a responsible AI governance platform. In my experience, it's the trust and safety teams that are fighting the good fight in terms of creating policies, but many times these are retrofitted into what product has already done, right? And Google has a massive amount of product surfaces. So you mentioned a few, but there's very many that we're not even that aware of because they operate in the background. Mm-hmm. And my question is, and I'm trying to tie this to campaigns, but many times you want to use Gen AI, many times you want to do that responsibly. And either the product teams or teams that are more aggressive, let's say the sales teams, or in this instance, like marketing teams, for example, like how do you balance that when your team is trying to struggle to keep up with the product or to keep up with all of the use cases that are already happening, and then trying to play catch up, so to speak? Because of course you want to enable the teams to use the technology, as has been said, but at the same time, many times the product tends to move faster than the policy or the trust and safety teams.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question. I can tell you a little bit how we thought about it at Google. Like I said, I've been there for about a little over 9 years or so. So basically, the short version is we embed ourselves pretty deeply with the product teams. And where this works best is when the product teams are in their early stages of thinking and formulation about a product idea. We have been fortunate enough where we're usually at the table and can say, okay, I see what you want to do and where you want to go. Let's start thinking about these issues. Let's build in these safety guardrails. Because you're right, you don't want to be in a position where a product has launched something into the world and now you're like, wait, how does this work? I'm not going to tell you that never happens. But it does happen rarely these days, for us, at least at Google, because we have now fairly established processes for doing this. Now look, you have to move at the speed of business, such a cliched phrase, and the product teams are going to want to do things, and there's, I think, some salience to the point of sometimes you do need to innovate in public, and that can be okay if you're transparent about it. And I think when it comes to the generative AI tools, we've said we want to be bold and responsible. The responsible part is perhaps self-explanatory, but the bold part means trying things, pushing things, experimenting a little bit, not experimenting, but sort of pushing things out so that the public can see what we're doing. So there's a little bit of give and take there. I do think, I can really only speak for Google, and I'm guessing for the other big companies as well, is that at this point, trust and safety is a decently enough established discipline. I mean, it's really only 5 or 6 years old, as you know, right? When I started at Google, we weren't even called trust and safety, right? That name came 4 years after I started. So now it's a little bit more of embedded into the sort of product development process, at least maybe at the larger companies.
I think we have one over here, and then we'll get to you over here.
Hi, Matt Leese. I'm professor of information computer science here at UT. Thanks so much for organizing this event. It's awesome. David was talking a bit about, I think it was invisible watermarking, and saying that we can sort of trace the provenance of generated AI. As I understand, it's still very much active research, and there's a lot of adversarial attacks on that. So can you tell us a little bit about what the state of that is for visible or invisible watermarking on text, imagery, video?
Sure, it's a great question. So you're right, it is still being researched and developed. I think, though, that there's beginning to be a little bit of a consensus, right? And so we have a standard SynthID, right, which is essentially allow for sort of watermarking on AI-generated imagery, which is embedded into some of our image-generated products. Part of this C2PA, which it's a real thing, which I have trouble pronouncing apparently, is to standardize metadata. So I think where ultimately you'll see the industry go is there's a standardized approach to essentially, and I use the term watermarking, it may be that technologists might use a slightly different term, but embedding code into these images so that they can be detected or identified as generated images. I think there will be a standardized format around that. Because ultimately what you want, and this is perhaps an ironic thing, you want to use AI to help you detect AI, right? You want to train your AI systems to look for certain signals, and these sort of identifiers are really important. So to detect at scale when people are using AI images, you want them to be able to give you reports on the provenance. These, if you have this embedded code, you should be able to say, this image created on this date by this model, right, at this time, right? Not necessarily by who, would depend, but at least you get a lot of information, and you want to be able to run a lot of reports. You want to be able to say, and where did this appear, in what jurisdictions, in what country, what was the frequency, if it's an ad, what were the impressions, right? You need AI to do all of this, or it will be better and faster and more scalable to have your AI systems do this. So I think we're headed there. We're not quite there yet. It takes a lot to get, collaboration is great, as you're saying, but it takes time to get everybody to align around a set of standards. Everybody has their particular idea. You need to get everybody on the same page. So this is where it's headed. I guess I don't have a great answer for you in exactly when, but I think sooner rather than later, if that's not too much of a dodge. Sure.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? I mean, we'll go to your question, because I think just from the campaign space for a second, I think what the hope is that, like with 2CPA, like campaigns would be able to dump their real content, get it watermarked, basically, and so if something came out, you'd be like, well, that wasn't our stuff, right? You'd be able to detect, like, hey, like, yeah, that speech that was not our speech.
I think that's right. I mean, if we have a standardized format, right, which particularly for the metadata, that basically says anytime there is let's use image or video, anytime there's that, right, behind that image or video, there's standardized information, so you could see, oh, okay, here's when this was created, and here's what model created it, right? And here's how much, perhaps we'll get there, here's how much of the original, this was an original image that was altered versus this was a completely new generation, right? That gives you a lot of context. So then at least you'd be able to say, if there was something problematic out there, you could say, well, listen, this was not created by Gemini. It looks like it was created by, I'm not going to pick on anyone, different language model, right? At this time, right? So we at least can get that information out into the marketplace, and whoever is distributing that at least has to answer those questions.
Great.
So
I think this will be our last question, so go ahead.
Hi, my name's Asher Price. I'm a reporter with Axios. Thanks, Michael and David, for the conversation. I wanted to pick up something on, David, you had mentioned, which was collaboration with federal officials. There was a Supreme Court ruling, Fifth Circuit ruling last fall saying that federal officials likely overstepped their bounds when kind of encouraging tech companies on COVID-19 misinformation. And I wondered, has that led to any kind of slowdown in collaboration with federal officials, or are there plenty of back channels in which you can collaborate? And then also, do you want more collaboration, as it were? I mean, does this make your life harder if the court says, federal officials and Google have to, stay far apart from each other?
It's a fair question. So when I was talking about collaborating with federal officials, I was mostly talking in the context of like White House commitments, like things like that, sort of very transparent above board meetings that we have with the administration or other folks about standards or thoughts in this area. Not the sort of what really I think the Supreme Court case was getting to, what they were suggesting was a more behind the scenes collaboration. Or I will say, I can speak to this knowledge base from my perspective, right? We don't sort of collaborate that way when it comes to like content or content policies with other folks. We might talk, of course, with lots of think tanks and third parties and other folks, generally speaking, about what they are seeing. But I can tell you this right now, having done this for a number of years, like if I'm dealing with a particular election ad and I'm trying to determine whether or not I think it constitutes, it's a problem or not, I'm not consulting with an administration or a government official, or even the campaigns, really, except perhaps to have a follow-up. And I think that level of independence is important. And even when it came to COVID-19, we have an in-house medical team of experts that kind of reviewed all the science, leveraged them to tell me essentially what they thought we could say or not say about vaccine efficacy or the state of different vaccines, because you'll recall at the time there were so many different vaccines across the world. So I'm not sure I can answer your second question about whether or not I think it makes it harder or not, because this hasn't been an area of, I think, particular difficulty. I generally think more collaboration is better. I'd always like more information. It'd be great, I suppose, if both with federal agencies and even with our peers and colleagues in the space, we could share more information. But I understand that raises other questions or concerns that people have. So I think for the most part, the engagement that we've done through third-party organizations, think tanks, even when we deal with federal agencies, but in public forums, is sufficient. And that makes it very transparent, so people understand that there's no, what do they say? Smoke-filled back room. That's what I'm trying. That's probably a dated reference now. Maybe people don't smoke as much.
Yeah.
Smoke indoors, at least.
So thank you so much, David. This was a terrific conversation. We really appreciate it. And of course, DDC always appreciates the work that we do with you. So thank you so much. And we'll hand it back over to our MC, Jason.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Yes.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Michael. How's everybody doing? All right. We're going to add some chairs here. As you see, Nate's added some stools. We're going to move over to our first panel conversation. While Congressman Hurd and Dave have been talking about things that from a very high bird's eye level, we're going to try to bring it down to the state of Texas. So this will be a conversation on the challenges and opportunities that campaigns in Texas in particular might be facing in this year's election cycle in the security and information space. And we have a truly fantastic lineup of panelists. We have not just the chair, but also the vice chair of the Innovation and Technology Caucus of the Texas State House, none of whom are lined up at the door. Let's see. Is anybody back there? Yeah, there we are. We've got Representative Giovanni Capriglione and Representative John Busey, respectively. We also have Ryan Dollar, the General Counsel for the National Republican Senatorial Committee. We're going to leave the far seat for the moderator. And then our fourth panelist will be Manny Garcia, a principal at Seeker Strategies here in Austin. And finally, our moderator is Jasper Scheer, a political reporter at the Texas Tribune. Jasper, take it away.
Thanks everyone for making it out. Appreciate you guys being here. I think before we dive into questions, we just wanted to get the panelists, and I'll start with you and go down, Ryan. Just introduce yourselves and maybe tell the audience a little bit about any relevant experience you have as far as our discussion today. Yeah.
I'm Ryan Dollar, I'm General Counsel of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. We are the National Party Committee on the Republican side for U.S. Senate elections. The one goal of our organization is to win Senate races. Increasingly, campaign security is a part of that. And so, our IT cybersecurity, that whole focus actually sits under kind of the executive part of the party committee because it's so important. So, yeah.
Manny Garcia, co-founder of Seeker Strategies. We're a communications and advocacy firm based here in Austin, but working with a number of folks across the country in DC and here in Texas as well. My background connection to this, I ran the Texas Democratic Party in 2020, been a party operative for the greater part of my career in and out of the Texas Capitol for over 15 years, I think at this point, in a number of different roles and organizations. I also serve on the Democratic Data Exchange Board currently. And so it's been my job to hire the kinds of people that, one, keep me out of jail, like Ryan, and then also hire the tech people that advise my candidates, my campaigns, and make sure they're doing a good job in protecting themselves from these kinds of attacks.
Hi everybody, my name is Giovanni Capriglione. I'm the Texas State Representative for House District 98, basically the Dallas-Fort Worth airport area. Before I got elected, I was a semiconductor designer and a computer programmer. I'm currently the chair of the Pensions, Investments, Financial Services Committee. I'm the chair of the IT caucus, which is the biggest bicameral bipartisan caucus in the Texas House. I was just recently appointed to be the chair of the new House Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technology. Last session, with the help of my friend John and others, we passed the Texas Digital Privacy Act, and currently working on, for the next session, our Artificial Intelligence Omnibus Bill. Thank you.
I'm State Representative John Busey from Williamson County, just up the road. I represent Austin and Round Rock and parts of Cedar Park. Apple computers on one side and Dell computers on the other side, so I decided I better start learning how computers work, and I joined the IT caucus. I serve as vice chair with Chairman Capriglione. He's telling the truth. I think it is our best bipartisan caucus in the legislature. We do a lot of work together. When we disagree on other issues, we compartmentalize that to make sure that we are trying to primarily educate our colleagues. We all just have to rely on Geo too much for his expertise, so we're trying to make sure everyone gets educated along the way as we are a rapidly changing state and making sure Texas is trying to catch up. In addition, if you saw the awkward intro here when I came up, I'm required by caucus rules to always sit to the left, stage left of Geo Capriglio. But thank y'all for having me. I love serving in the legislature and being part of this.
Awesome.
I think we'll stick with you, Representative Busey, on this first one. Just kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit for the rest of our discussion. Kind of generally speaking, how would you expect AI to be used to disrupt elections in 2024? What are some of the kind of the biggest challenges or concerns that you're thinking about ahead of this fall?
Well, I think it's, you know, we look at the difference between a presidential race, obviously, and then local elections. And I think at the presidential level, we're going to see it used a lot. We've already seen it used, this robocall, you know, using deepfake President Biden's voice. I think we've seen it used in other elections, mayoral race in Chicago, using deepfake, and people believe it. And whether they believe it or not, it's changing their thought process, it's changing the narrative. It's not that this is inherently new, but it's becoming so much easier for the everyday person to use. You don't have to have near the skill set to take advantage of AI. And while that is great in a lot of facets of our life, it can be very scary when it comes to anybody being able to impersonate another elected official or a candidate and then put words in their mouth that they don't believe. And I think as that happens more and more, we're just, not only will it have a negative impact immediately on that candidate, it will also start to totally break down our faith in this system at all when it comes to that. So I think we have to be very scared about how easy accessible this is when it's used in the wrong way.
Anything to add to that, Representative?
Sure. Obviously, I agree with a lot of everything that John said. No, not everything. We have to still say that we don't agree on everything, and that's part of the shtick. So, I mean, yes. I mean, you're going to see, as you are already, deep fakes, cheap fakes. You're going to see cyber attacks, right? People still doing the phishing attacks. People using the data that they've collected on individuals to specifically focus their targets or even give them information to maybe try and change their minds. I would say it's also important to talk about the difference between the very top level race, where I don't believe anybody here can be persuaded, no matter what you see on the internet, to change your mind about the top candidate. You will also have the opportunity to vote for, and depends where you live, 50 or 60 other candidates, and maybe that's where you're going to see those changes. I think just as importantly as those persuasive type of disinformation, misinformation, is going to be those that either suppress or promote the get out the vote efforts. And those in some ways are just as important. If this election misinformation, to just categorize all of that, is an attempt to get a certain group of people to not vote, that in a way is almost as impactful as changing people's persuasion. So that could be saying the elections are closed, or like we saw with the ones in New England, the election's closed today, or hey, there's a new pandemic and if you're over 65, you shouldn't go out. Those are the types of things that in close races will be effective.
Sure. Yeah, building on the representative's point here about false information going out to mislead voters. I mean, we all know the troubled history of American democracy, right? And we go back to Jim Crow era, or we go back to Black people being told, you know, polling locations aren't open today, or polling locations are somewhere else, or these kinds of things. You fast forward a bit more and add nation-state actors into this. In 2015, there was this situation here in Texas called Jade Helm 15. It's a U.S. military exercise that is just a practicing exercise, right? But there was a lot of misinformation about it. And later we found out that a former CIA and NSA director said, and wrote in his book, Michael Hayden wrote, that it was actually a Russian misinformation campaign to move and see what they could do with the right and see what they could do with state actors. Governor Abbott called on the Texas National Guard to monitor the U.S. military out of all of this. He was used by Russia in this process. So a formal state action was taken as Russia was moving to see what they could do. And the CIA director said that the result of this was actually to embolden Russia to then say, oh, maybe we can take on elections. Maybe we can do more of that. Let's fast forward to now, and conversation about AI and other things. There's this Cornell University study that talks about if you're debating a language model and the language model knows a bit more about you than a regular canvasser that's coming to talk to you, that language model has an 80% probability of being able to convince you more than if a real person went to go talk to you and attempted to convince you. So the potential for danger is huge, and we already know that action has happened to convince folks to take action.
What about you, Ryan, from your perspective? You guys watching out for?
Yeah, so you know, to step a little bit away from the AI angle, I think we are watching probably most closely kind of traditional financial criminals, but cyber criminals. So like to explain a little bit of how you know, some of the money is spent or what it looks like. You know, these campaigns, they don't have a full-time accountant or CFO. They typically will use a small shop because the campaign finance rules and federally and on the state level are so complicated. There are these sort of like specialized accountants, and if they are not like protected on the cyber front, you will see in the heat of a campaign a political person say, hey, we've got this ad ready, it's got to ship today, or else our opponent's beating us up, we've got to get on the air now, pay this invoice, because a TV station won't air an ad unless they have the money. And so they're used to getting these invoices for large amounts kind of immediately. What we've seen is people emulating campaign staff. And if John Smith is campaign manager, it'll be John Smith1 at smithforsenate.com sending an invoice saying, hey, this needs to get paid now. Well, Treasurer wires $1 million to the wrong bank. That's a huge mistake. So yeah, they're just getting so much more kind of educated and sophisticated on how the campaigns operate. So
I think also just to kind of expand on what Representative Capriglione was alluding to there, I think the vast majority of elections in Texas are these down ballot contests. They don't have the multi-million-dollar war chests that you probably would need to really bring on a dedicated team to fend off these attacks. So I guess I'm curious from the strategist perspective, I guess just with that in mind, what sort of challenges does the advent of AI and just kind of the increasing intensity of cyber attacks pose to these campaigns, just in terms of simply having the resources to combat the bad actors? And Manny, if you want to kick.
Yeah, look, to Ryan's point here, like I've had staff that's been emulated before. I have had press operatives who've been emulated in emails to the press, creating a sort of fake statement. And but for the strong relationship that that operative had built with the press, and some responsibility on the media's part to make sure to double check, is this thing real or not? And it's just like kind of on the edge of like just plausible, trying to pick a little break between the Democratic Party, a little faction, a little wedge that they could use. Written right before a really big national event. I can't like say the specific of exactly what happened, but this kind of stuff happens, right? So then what does a down ballot campaign do or a state party do? Well, they don't have the kinds of resources of the DNC or the presidential campaign or the US Senate campaigns. They have to hopefully rely on really great guidance and a really great team at the national level. The DNC has a cybersecurity team. When I ran the state party, I had a CTO who had a background in cybersecurity. She's now the head of engineering at the DNC, Lauren Pulley. And she built this culture of wanting to make sure that everybody in the institution understood the threat of what could potentially happen, and that we could actually talk to the candidates about it. And so while the political team's trying to engage on, how to build your field team and what do you think about your win number and how to move on your tactics, here's somebody from the tech team also telling the political team, hey, I need you to make sure to convey to the member or the candidate and the campaign manager that this is important. And I need them to do, even from the basics of y'all, like, just like two-factor and all of these things, from the basics all the way to the more complicated stuff. But that also, it's cross-departmental, right? You need the comms team needs to understand that this is, then they have to have a rapid response plan available and make sure that that they get the sort of support necessary to intervene and do something. And something like this might be like, There was a 2018 instance of Russian operatives building 2 Facebook groups so that they could have a competing protest at a mosque in Texas, right? A candidate can easily be roped into something like that with 2 big Facebook groups starting to be built up and this potential thing happening, and it results in real people showing up to a thing.
We need perspective on that, Ryan, too?
Yeah, I mean, it can actually sometimes be hard on the federal level to get people to pay for these services because, you know, some people want every single dollar spent on voter contact. But what has made it easier has been, there have been sort of like some legislative and administrative fixes to campaign finance that have been super helpful. There in 2014, there was something added to an omnibus bill that allows the party committees to pay for certain building type expenses. So because of that, it's money that can't be spent on voter contact. So that's one example. And then the FEC approved, you know, DDC's ability to help campaigns for free again, for federal candidates. So I just, you know, shooting from the hip, wonder if there aren't some like state kind of campaign finance fixes that could allow funds to be kind of spent on that.
Well, and kind of on a related note for the lawmakers here, I mean, obviously you guys are you know, mired in this, paying attention to it constantly, but do you feel like your fellow lawmakers are generally aware of, you know, of this issue, that being AI and just kind of cyber threats to elections in general, or do you feel like it's still more that they're trying to wrap their heads around it, Representative?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm obviously every time there's anything about deepfakes or whatever, people are texting me and the latest articles to show me. So members definitely care. I mean, elections are one of the most important things that we focus on before getting to serve our constituents in the House. But I think it's important to delineate the normal protected free speech portion of the normal rough and tumble of a campaign versus those that are specifically using technology to provide false, libelous, slanderous activity. Like on the first side, all right, so my opponent, I had an election, and I had an opponent who forgot a comma and made it look like Donald Trump had endorsed against me, okay? I'm sure it was an accident, but again, that was, I won 70-30, by the way. But anyway, so the point is that that's fine. I expect a certain amount of falsehoods and misinformation in a campaign, and we all know that, and that's why we're suspicious when we see mailers attacking one another. The thing that legislators are worried about, of course, is when someone starts to portray themselves, their likeness, or their image, or tries to provide some sort of authoritative documentation that says you're doing something wrong. And at the very high level, again, president, US senator, that's easily dispelled by the media. They will say, hey, today there was some fake stuff. But for us, you know, something that's written, a blog post, multiple blog posts, AI to go and promote it to specific people, that's hard to combat with just a few days left. I mean, almost impossible. And so what we're gonna look at, I think, for sure, because it is one of the more important things that legislators are looking at, is how do we and how can we prevent those types of things. And our record in the House has been mixed on where we think content moderation should be and where we should be on some of this other stuff. But I'm hoping we can figure out what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the question of our colleagues paying attention, I think the answer is yes. We're becoming more and more aware. I think the Texas legislature probably moves a little behind, you know, technological advancement. That was the goal of the IT caucus, was to help catch us up and be an education platform. We work with Lunch and Learns and our members that join the IT caucus from the different, you know, tech spaces to help educate us, help inform us, help prepare us for legislation ideas when we're thinking about how to combat these things. So, I mean, I think we are playing catch up. A lot of my colleagues, you know, these are smart people, but not necessarily from the IT space. And so I think the role is, we've got a lot of room to improve, but the IT caucus the last few years has been working really hard at that, and I think we're really cutting into that. I think when it comes to a lot of these things, you know, we're doing a lot of good bipartisan work there. You're right, as far as like, we're still confused on where to draw the lines on tech and what it means in Texas. And I think trying to make sure Texas is continue to be an innovative leader and not put too many restraints on that growth from a tech industry, while also making sure this type of stuff is being protected and prevented here. I think the other thing beyond tech space, we have a responsibility, and when you think about down ballot as elected officials, our Secretary of State will constantly remind us, our Republican appointed Secretary of State will constantly remind us how safe and secure Texas elections are. I had a meeting yesterday with Secretary of State, in fact, on elections, and doubling down on that narrative. So I think that just puts the extra burden on us to remind the voters out there, and not something we can just play into. We have an obligation to remind them regularly that our elections in Texas, speaking as a Texas elected official, are running smoothly and securely, and that reinforcement is going to help counter some of this narrative. And so it's meeting tech with reality and reassurance of the office.
Sure. I had asked earlier about sort of some of the limits with in terms of resources, but I'm curious, for those campaigns that do have the money to theoretically spend on this issue. And maybe I'll start with you on this one, Ryan. I mean, how should they, and how would you expect campaigns this year to work to fend off malicious, activity as far as AI and cyber attacks? I mean, is it as simple as just kind of having a dedicated team of experts on staff? I mean, in an ideal setting, probably talking about the presidential and Senate campaigns here. I mean, how should they be approaching this issue?
Yeah, so I think first it's important to have strong teams of the national party committees because we are in a place to have the resources, have all the vendors, and kind of provide that expertise. I think a second thing that is huge is these campaigns need to, not to be the lawyer, but they need to contract in a way where they shift the liability to the vendors, because the vendors are really in control of so much here of the spending, the content, and so, or even if they're not in control, it's an easy way for hackers to cause some trouble. So I think there are ways like through a contract where if you say, hey, vendor who is focused on money, you're going to pay a lot if there's certain hacks, stuff like that. So yeah, I think those would be sort of the two focuses.
Any other thoughts on that, Manny?
No, just I completely agree that the national committees set the tone and set the importance, right? You see state parties follow the lead of what the national committees set up. County parties, to some extent, follow the lead of what state parties set up, right? These are all independent organizations. In Texas, it's 254 counties, so you're looking at 254 organizations, one state party to work with them. They're not going to have, a tremendous amount of staff at the state party, and especially the ebb and flow of staff is pretty dramatic. To have a committee come down to just a few dozen, and yet at the peak of the campaign we'll have several hundred, right? So the ongoing pipeline of how do you keep the talent in, how do you make sure that this is still part of the culture consistently, and regardless of whether election day is just a few weeks away, or whether we're in a legislative session at this point, or we're in some other point, it's still going to be incredibly important. And unfortunately, it's one of those line items that you got in looking like way down ballot. I mean, you got like a manager and the candidate, and like maybe you have like one or two more staffs, and you're lucky you have some volunteers, right? Like this is the actual setup of a campaign. They got to deal with a potentially really big problem, and to John's earlier point, a really big problem that more people can have access to cause a lot of damage in a very fast way. So we really do need the guardrails of law in place in order to help out the committees and everything set up our candidates for success.
Yeah, and I can't remember if you guys both have general election opponents this year, but just are you personally thinking about this for your own campaigns? Again, it might be a matter of resources, but how are you thinking about this personally as a candidate?
I think for me, I'm more worried about cyber attacks and phishing attacks and malware attacks and financial attacks and that kind of stuff. So we are cognizant of that. I don't expect at our level for them to use like massive amount of AI generated Twitter bots or to go after at least me. I wouldn't because I know people. No, I'm just. I don't, but I guess I am personally today, in my level, more worried about cyber attacks and just more of those traditional attacks, which could in some ways be generated using artificial intelligence. But I'm not so worried about some deepfake imagery.
Yeah.
You know, I think I agree right now. I think this is still pretty new, but it's going to become more and more used and more accessible. And so I think it's something that we'll see happening more even at lower level city council, school board races and stuff over time. I don't think it's going to be too prevalent this time. I think, you know, Manny made a point earlier that when you go back to kind of the civil rights and there'd be like, oh, the polls are closed today or this mixed narrative, we can do a better job from a government standpoint of making sure that there are trusted resources out there. I had a bill last session that would have said all county election sites have to go to the .gov as opposed to like a .com or a .org. That's something that is not being utilized enough. The percentage of people taking advantage of this is not happening. And why it matters is if it's a .gov website for your election information, you think about 254 counties need to do this in Texas, it would be a trusted avenue if you're a user, as opposed to how easy it would be to create a fake website, you know, williamsoncounty.elections.org, and then you go out there and you put misinformation about where to go vote. I think that is what I'm more scared of today, to Chairman's point, is, you know, those are tactics that could be easily utilized, but we as a government can step in and take it from an optional avenue to mandating that we get these .gov sites. And I had a bill on that, so maybe we can get it done next.
Did I help you?
Hey, and to that point about, you know, we have come a ways on the kind of information that's getting put. Just a few years ago, the polling locations weren't reported to the SOS. Right, and so, you know, John Busey worked on this bill. Texas Democratic Party really needed it because we're investing a ton of staff hours into collecting all these polling locations so that we could make a polling location locator. Google does some of this as well, right? And so John Busey got it all to get reported to the SOS so that then there could be one central location to look for it. Back when we were calling these county elections offices to send us the polling locations, they'd be like, well, I'll fax it to you. We had like a handwritten thing of like 15 locations, and they wouldn't put like an address next to it. It'd be like the corner of such and such, or, you know, the like colloquial name for a building.
It wasn't
this
required
is what you're dealing with
until 2019 to put an address of where the voting site. You could literally say we vote at the so-and-so church.
Yep. You know,
without an address, which in a small town, maybe people know that, but if you're a new resident or if you're trying to, you know, get information out statewide, we were archaic system. This is what we mean by the importance of the IT caucus trying to move us rapidly ahead.
Right.
I'll also say, you know, it isn't so much about whether it's going to be used against us personally, although we would obviously take that personally. But, you know, it's about that this is really, and these types of activities are direct attacks on our democracy, right? You know. I don't have to tell you, over the last few years, there's already been questions about the integrity of the system and so on. So adding more suspicion, having more disbelief, getting people, unfortunately, maybe frustrated with the whole entire experience is an actual problem in terms of not just a particular candidate, but on what we decide to keep doing in the future. How are we as humans going to handle this problem? And I mean, there's two ways to do it. Hopefully people take the time now to verify, validate their sources. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see someone repost something and it says, I don't know if this is true, but. Just don't do that, all right? Hopefully we can find ways around that.
Yeah. And I think I did also want to ask you guys about, you know, I think this will depend a little bit on how the 2024 elections play out, but just
we're going to win.
Start with you, Representative Busey. I mean, I'm curious what sorts of measures you expect to see, you know, or maybe ones that you even personally plan to prioritize yourself. Just what, you know, Texas legislature 2025, what are we thinking about for possible regulations or just any sorts of measures?
I think you're right to preface this with we got to see how kind of the primary and then general elections play out, because unfortunately, I'm approaching next session like we usually do. We're drafting bills, we're getting ready, but I think we could be going into a very different dynamic of a Texas legislature. But with that said, I think the IT caucus, you know, has to move forward with hope for doing positive, good legislation for the people of Texas. I think in the past, recently, we've put in punishments for doing deepfakes. Senator Hughes, I believe, did you work on that bill with him?
That was before I did.
Okay, but there's punishments there. You know, that needs to be in place. We've got to look at cybersecurity and preventative nature. I think, you know, my bill which may seem small, about the .gov and just giving us more secure, stable outlets is what we need to do. And I know that the chairman will add to this. He's working on an AI select committee to look at how we can legislate this, and I'll let him take it from there.
Yeah, in our select committee, the Speaker of the House specifically talked about elections. I think I've seen similar AI activity from the Senate. So yeah, I think there will be legislation specifically around elections. It may be as simple as making sure there's disclosure, that there's disclaimers when people are using artificial intelligence, maybe in their own campaigns, making sure that a lot of this stuff that's happening is already, quite frankly, not legal, or at least should be reported to our Ethics Commission. If you're using or creating any imagery or documents and so on in order to advocate for or against a position or an individual, right? But since you are getting faxes, there's still a lot of fax machines and other things inside of our code. Maybe we have to add and provide a more complete definition of the things that Texas Ethics and others do. We will probably go and continue to work on the deepfake statutes that we have to be able to expand that, increase the penalties, and I think we're going to see what happens in November and probably be reactive to what actually happens.
And on the disclosure front, I know that's been proposed at the federal level. that idea is out there.
Mm-hmm.
That does sound like something to you that could get some bipartisan buy-in.
So. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Both you guys, yeah.
I think transparency and disclosure is important. Always. Yeah.
And then it would be up to the publishers to be whether they want to promote that or not, right? And as long as, I've always felt that if you're transparent, let the voters decide, right? But it's just been more difficult when people come up with fake PAC names and all that kind of stuff, so that's still going to be out there.
Yeah, and I guess from the strategist perspective, is there anything you guys are that hasn't already been mentioned, or maybe that has, that you guys would like to see, or that you're hopeful for, or that you think could go a long way? Either of you guys want to kick that off?
Yeah, I think enforcement is something that needs to be kind of talked about more. You can have laws against this, but it doesn't really matter if a candidate has lost an election over it. Right. And I think also with the ad platforms, how quickly can you get some of these ads kind of removed, or if there is a situation of like a deep fake. With like television advertising, you call the station and you can get an ad pulled if it's a certain level of defamatory. I think it's really important that the Googles and other ad platforms are in touch with the campaigns or party committees and can move quickly before there's damage that has occurred that can't be taken back.
And would you expect that to be done? We've got two state lawmakers here, but is that more? Do you see that as more of a federal thing, or could it be either or, where that's enforcing this?
Yeah, I think it's almost more of like just a business decision. I think it's best for the companies to not have to get wrapped up in later enforcement or litigation.
Have anything to add on that?
Look, I just said, beyond to the point about enforcement having teeth behind some of these things that are required. Also, just outside of the law, what is the culture we are setting? What is the example that elected officials and leaders are setting? Can the governor, these legislators, call in the companies, meet with them, make sure the Secretary of State cares about this, and that everybody's having the ongoing conversation of, hey, this is what's in the law, but also we're seeing this in practice in your platform is incredibly personal to them. They put their name on the ballot. These are their lives. Their families are very invested in all of this stuff. And so, beyond what's in the law, we also just want to see good practice. At the end of the day, democracy is every single institution needs to hold those pillars up, right? So the media has a responsibility, the lawmakers have a responsibility, the corporate world has a responsibility as well.
I think we have a couple more minutes left. I just kind of want to throw this out there to everyone. I think we've all had a very, just respectful, nonpartisan conversation about this today. But these sorts of issues can get hairy pretty quickly. So maybe I'll start with the lawmakers down there. With Chairman Capriglione. Do you feel like this is, an issue that you can, beyond just folks in the, the IT caucus who you know closely, do you feel like this is an issue where you can comfortably, talk to folks who maybe don't, aren't on the same political wavelength as you, but they still take the idea of cybersecurity seriously. I wonder if you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was able to work on the Texas Cybersecurity Act, legacy modernization, and the privacy bill, and all three of those I passed unanimously out of the House and the Senate, right? So I think it isn't a partisan issue. Now, does that mean some consumer groups and maybe industry folks will go in and try to mess that up? It's possible, but we do so much work ahead of time. People, I mean, we're talking about it out there right now, some of the things that we're gonna work on in the next session. Sometimes it's more about a local issue or some person that got to one individual lawmaker and said, hey, that I don't like that because of this. But I don't see this as being an issue that is going to be controversial in any way.
No, I agree. I think this is an area where, if we believe in protecting democracy, which I know, both sides at the core do, then this is a commitment to these types of protections. And that's been bipartisan history in the Texas House of doing that. And I hope to see that move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I know you guys aren't in a lawmaking body, but do you have any thoughts to add on that front?
I'd be remiss to say if the concern of election integrity led to an insurrection at the United States Capitol, right? So I think you have two very responsible lawmakers here, and they know their colleagues, and they are working on their colleagues to do real practical legislation that can make a difference. I think that tone of responsibility needs to be set by everybody who is seeking to run for president and everybody who has any involvement in the functions of our democracy. But this happened, and we need to fix it. It's incumbent on all of us to fix it. I also just want to say on a positive note that the tech is amazing. There's a group called Shotline. Shotline recreated the voices of the kids from Uvalde that died to talk about their experience. And the families were working with Shotline because they wanted to make sure to get this message out. And in such a powerful way, you could recreate these voices and touch people and help them understand what is at stake in these issues. So things can be used for good. We need the guardrails, and we need the responsibility, we need the culture to make sure to do it right.
Yeah. I guess I'll let you have the last word, Ryan. Do you also sort of share the view that this can and should be bipartisan?
Yeah. I hope so. Yeah. I think that there's responsibility for everyone to media reporting on it accurately, both sides being willing to talk about the issues. And it is a really tough issue because it won't surprise y'all that I believe this, but you have to balance everything with the First Amendment, and more speech is good speech and kind of allows people to be informed. But on the other hand, where is that limit where that speech goes too far?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to kind of work on together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, guys, thanks for coming out, sticking with us, and thanks to the panelists for your thoughtful answers. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was a really fantastic conversation. We're going to move on to our second panel and last panel of the morning. This is going to be a very practical conversation about ways that campaigns can protect themselves, bootstrap campaigns can meet these threats. Our panelists are Grace Hoyt from here at Google. She's a global product partnerships lead. Matt, come on up, Grace. Matt Hodges is the executive director at Zinc Labs. Ben Botti is the Vice President of Innovation and Research at the Dallas Regional Chamber. And Ryan O'Toole is the U.S. Election Integrity Lead here at Google. And Michael, he'll be moderating.
I'm back. Thank you all for hanging in there. This is a panel where the rubber hits the road. So really thrilled to be having this discussion. But let's just start out. We know who you are by your title. But why don't we just start, Grace, we'll move this way. Just tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, what you do at Google.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everyone. I lead privacy, safety, and security partnerships at Google as a part of our team that is specifically focused on protecting those who use Google's products and platforms that are at highest risk of targeted cyber attacks. So as a part of that, I work very closely through our partnership with Michael and team at Defending Digital Campaigns, as well as across industry and other expert organizations that help us make sure that high-risk individuals are using the strongest security tools that Google offers.
Hi, I'm Matt Hodges. I'm the executive director of Zinc Labs. Zinc Labs focuses on the intersection of talent and technology on Democratic campaigns. We work with Democratic campaigns up and down the ballot to not only bring technical talent into the electoral ecosystem, but also work with them on their tech strategy and figuring out how they can deploy either in-house built tools or vendor-provided tools on their campaigns. This focuses largely on the strategy of the campaign, but also the cybersecurity of adopting those tools. I come into this role with a tech background. I was previously the director of engineering on the Joe Biden campaign in 2020.
I'm Ryan O'Toole. I work very closely with Grace and Michael as an employee of Google's Trust and Safety team focused on primarily the US election. So focusing on trying to pull our many different work streams that are coalescing around our US 2024 strategy. So identifying some of these protections tools, working with teams that have identified different threats internally at Google and how we can marry those to the audience and the users that are actually going to really need those through the 2024 cycle.
And I'm Ben Boddy. I'm the VP of Innovation and Research over at the Dallas Regional Chamber, former staffer for both the governor and the lieutenant governor, so I have a little bit of insight into sort of how the campaigns and then the effect of how that happens in terms of what happens in offices, how that affects different security issues and how you keep yourself open. My background is born and raised in Dallas and had a little bit of that experience in technology working in blockchain in the metaverse. So happy to be here and provide the insight from the business perspective of what the chamber in Dallas can bring.
Great. So, you know, really terrific panel here and a lot of experience in the campaign space. I want to start with Ben and Matt, though, who are sort of the campaign veterans here, so to speak. And just to ask you, I don't think people fully understand, like, how complicated, and not complicated in a scary way, but like how campaigns actually work, you know, like and what kind of challenges those create when it comes to things like cybersecurity or even adopting technology generally, I think, which I know you work on as well. And so what are those unique challenges that differentiate campaigns, I think, from other kinds of organizations? I don't know who wants to go first. You can duke it out.
So I think when you look at how campaigns are really started, they're really started up like startups. A number of startups that I have been a part of, the beginning of all those phases is you're kind of just playing triage with everything that's out there, right? So a lot of times when you're thinking about security, it's the last thing on your mind. You're first thinking about how do we get this campaign, how do we get this member in, how do we get this person into office to become a member? And then the other part of it is balancing that with being open to the public. That's always a challenge. It was probably the first year that they started doing doxing in the governor's office when I was working there in 2018. So people would show up at the office and start harassing the staffers. When I worked with Dan Patrick for the first time when I came into the office, he told me about an incident where somebody came in there with a gun. And so people forgot about that. It's happened way back when in the earlier 2000s that someone came into his office with a gun. And they had to be open. So there's a balance that I think you strike with campaigns and offices, and how do you do that? And then I think the other part is just making sure people are aware of it. After all that doxing happened in the governor's office, they started to train us into what to look for, and they also gave us escape routes and different routes to get in, just so we didn't have to deal with the issue that we didn't really have any part of or any need of to be part of. So,
yeah. I like that analogy of a startup. I sometimes joke that a campaign is basically like a year-long marketing startup, and what you're marketing is a person. But to really drive home a point there is also just the pace at which the organization stands up and spins down. On day 0, you have 0 people working for the campaign. It does not exist. On day 1, suddenly you have a bunch of people working for the campaign. If you're a down ballot race, that might be 1, 2, 3, or 4 people. As you move up the ballot, that can be larger. Through the primary cycle in 2020, the Biden campaign had about 200 people on staff. and then you hit another cliff. Once you get through the primary cycle, your staff footprint changes very rapidly as well. In 2020, the Biden campaign went from about 200 staff to 2,000 staff in about 3 weeks. And so just the operational challenges of onboarding staff into the systems that they need access to, getting them access to devices, getting them access to accounts, setting them up with password managers and security keys, in a matter of weeks for 10xing your footprint is very, very daunting. You don't 10x your help desk staff when you do that, by the way. So as you bring on all your field organizers and your paid media team and your digital organizing team, the help desk maybe grows by a couple head count. The other challenge here is just the culture of considering election day as the finish line. So everything that you do is of the mindset of like, it just needs to work to get us to election day. And that can create us pretty strong incentive to cut corners or, as you mentioned, deprioritize security. And so you really need to push on that culture of like, just because we're turning this all off on election day doesn't mean that you can ignore this because it's not the most important thing in your job. We tell campaigns constantly that cybersecurity is not going to win you this election, but it might lose you this election. And so we work very directly with campaigns to really make them understand that maybe this doesn't feel directly related to the work that you're doing with organizing and speaking to voters and raising money, but any one misstep can really throw all of that into jeopardy. So there's this culture challenge with getting staff on board with taking this work seriously. I will say to their credit, over the past 8 years, at least on the Democratic side, that has evolved a lot, and I think most campaigns do take it very seriously. But then there's still that persistent operational challenge of how do you actually implement that when a campaign is spinning up and then growing and then shutting down so quickly?
So just a quick follow-up on that, Matt. So the staff grew 10x, right? Was that in one location?
So in 2020, it was not. It was dispersed across the country. We were working fully remote. We had to figure out how to get laptops and onboard people into their Google Workspace accounts and get them security keys and figure out all the other organizing systems that they were using for raising money or digital organizing or managing events, making sure that they had all of their permissions set up. And we were doing that over video calls. And troubleshooting a security key over a video call is not the easiest thing in the world to do. And again, we had a very small IT team that was doing it, and they moved mountains to get it done. But yeah, if everyone was in the room and we could just kind of push people through an assembly line, it might be a little bit easier, but still getting that time off of people's calendars remains challenging when they're already working 2 to 3 jobs on the campaign already.
Yeah, and so campaigns like startups and then unlike startups, because I don't know any other startup that went from 200 to 2,000 between Tuesday and Thursday.
Right. I also don't know of any other startup that says, okay, well, on November 6th, we're closing the doors and that is our goal.
Yeah.
Like most startups have like a pretty long runway that they're envisioning, and they can grow into their operations.
So Grace, let's get down a little bit more in the weeds here and talk about sort of the number one thing that we know campaigns at risk are basically accounts being compromised. And when we DDC, we talk about that, as really like the number one thing that you have to protect, because people have accounts on the campaign, they have personal accounts, they have accounts with various vendors, they're doing social, they're doing all these things, and we know that the bad actors, that's what phishing's all about. It's about stealing credentials, it's about getting into the accounts. So there are a number of authentication methods out there, authentication being like MFA. You all know it as MFA. Some of us call it authentication. We like that word better. Can you talk about some of the newer efforts that are going on? There have been some really kind of major developments in multi-factor authentication and protecting accounts, and Google's led the way in some of these things, but also participated as a corporate company, in the ecosystem writ large around this. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add one anecdote to the startups analogy, I would say add the fact that these startups are being targeted and they're on the attention of nation states around the world as the thing that they want to phish. Meanwhile, they're trying to get their jobs done and under immense pressure to do so with varying resources and IT support. So yes, authentication. I was so glad the Congressman mentioned phishing being the cause of 90% of all attacks. This obviously is something our team is very focused on. So just to share a little background on the Google side as well as the kind of authentication journey in these different standards, we do automatically protect against phishing at Google. In a product like Gmail, 99.9% of all of that is blocked. So you can imagine kind of like junk your inbox would look like if that wasn't happening. And we also talked a little bit about the positive aspects of AI. That's machine learning doing its work for you. So that's really exciting. There's a lot of things like that that are built into our products. However, when it does come to political campaigns or what we call these higher risk users of our products, they are maybe getting the most sophisticated attack types and phishing types. They're kind of at the tip of the spear. So we recommend a strong authentication for anyone, not just campaigns, but we definitely want campaigns in the strongest form. So historically, as you were talking about the efforts to have security keys, we have recommended security keys. We have something called the Advanced Protection Program that requires security keys, and it gives you that stepped-up account safety. So you can see a lot of attention focused on like securing those digital accounts. Folks have so many of them, and that's really the attack vector. The FIDO Alliance is a cross-industry group some folks may be aware of that sets the authentication standards for everyone. So something like a security key, we have security keys, but Michael and team also work with Yubico. It's another security key. It doesn't really matter which type you use. That has been the strongest and the best form. But to compare that with something like a text verification, which a lot of folks in cybersecurity have kind of said this is almost useless because if you're trying to remember that code, you can be phished in the middle of that moment that you're going to input that code. So we really wanted to push people to the strongest form. However, security keys are a lift to undertake, as you said. Troubleshooting that remotely is, we've done that, spent years and many calls to doing that in this space. It's not the easiest. So there's been this ambition to do away with passwords and also make a strong form of authentication that's easy to use. So we talk about like something you know versus something you have. You want that form of authentication to be something you have. It literally wipes out the ability for remote attackers to be able to get into your account. They would have to be physically on your person, which obviously in certain instances can still be a risk, but it's significantly shrinking that risk. So moving from the security key, the same FIDO Alliance created something called Passkey. Folks may already be using it, whether or not you're aware that you're using it. It allows you to authenticate into an account online the same way you would log into your phone. So it could be your phone PIN, could be a face scan, could be putting your fingerprint, whatever you've chosen on your phone, you're going to get prompted to sign in that way. So you can do this to log into your Google account, but we've also partnered with folks like favorite sites and apps, and we want everyone to do this. So World Password Day is May 6th. Like World Password Day this year, and I know Michael, you say this, is get rid of the password, just sign in the way you would sign into your phone. And that is such a strong form of authentication, and it's so much easier for people and frictionless. So we're moving in that direction, and you can still use security keys for people that want that, and you can store your passkey on that security key. So I know there's a lot of details, but point being, let's make that type of authentication as strong as possible and as easy and practical to use as possible, because we know these passwords, it's just not working. People are repeating them, and people are using the password 1, 2, 3, and it's instead of trying to kind of say everybody change that behavior, we want to say let's make a type of authentication that's so easy that we've raised the bar for everyone.
Yeah, I'm waiting for goodbye, see you later password day. But just a quick follow-up on that, Grace. So passkeys are relatively new into the marketplace. I think even like late last year they really started to gain some traction. Do you have a sense of it's not going to happen right away? But how long it might take till really we see this broad-based implementation? Because all these other services have to adopt it. Companies have to adopt using it. Do you have a sense of 5 years, 3 years?
Absolutely. I can't forecast out, but I think you're right that this is a process, a rollout process. So the team that kind of built passkeys is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, a lot of cross-industry folks. They started this effort over 10 years ago, maybe more, to build this standard. And finally, we have it, and it's out in the wild, and you can do it on Android and Chrome and across any platforms. It's cross-compatible, but it takes some time to stand it up. So wherever you can, we say go to the strongest form of authentication where you can, where you're signing in somewhere. So some instances that passkey may not be available yet. So this is why we think collaboration is so important, getting the word out and working and supporting folks. So, a few partners we worked with are like PayPal, Uber, different places where people are frequently authenticating in. Maybe places, maybe the part of the industry you'll see move the fastest is if sensitive data is there, or financial transactions, eBay, things like that. You'll see them go first, and then we're hoping that it'll come to everyone. The good news is too, I'll mention, because I have to do this Google account. A lot of people use their Google account to sign in wherever they go. So we're saying get that Google account to the strongest form of authentication, and then take that authentication with you. That helps hedge a little bit against that if these other sites and apps haven't set up passkey yet.
So basically, you're saying use your sign-in with Google.
Use your sign-in with Google.
Put the strongest lock on your front door, and then take your front door with you.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the way I like to think of it. So Ryan, Grace alluded to this a little bit, but about the importance of security keys and those kinds of things. But there's some stuff under the hood for high-risk users in Google. Can you talk a little bit about sort of from the product perspective, the security that's in there? Because I think that's we try to drive people to get the most out of the platforms, most security out of the platform they're using, because basically they're either paying for it or it's free already, so they might as well go for it.
No, exactly, and that's a great point to sort of drive at the outset, right? A lot of these tools are out there are free, and so it's driving that sort of ease of adoption challenge when we work with campaigns to make sure that they understand these are offerings that are out there, take advantage of them. At the outset, though, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that at Google, when we're talking about the different protections that are available out there, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for campaigns, and I think everybody here has alluded to that in some form. And so when we talk about the different offerings that we have, we're thinking about broadly applied cybersecurity protections. So the APP Advanced Protection Program is one of those. I'll touch on that here in a moment. And then we have other projects or efforts that are more focused on sort of the granular threats that we know are typical of election cycles and election periods. So that's something like Project Shield, where we provide unlimited protection against DDoS attacks, something that we've seen consistently over election cycles. But with respect to the Advanced Protection Program, this is something, again, that's going to just elevate your security posture across your accounts, those Google accounts that you're utilizing to further whatever it is your organization is doing, be a campaign or a state entity that's facilitating the election. There's sort of three foundational underpinnings that Advanced Protection really helps to substantiate or promote that cybersecurity status for. And the first piece is something that Grace really drove home, and making sure that your security login credentials across a large organization that may have hundreds of individuals is substantiated with two-factor authentication that is paired with that physical security key. Again, a lot of us are familiar with the push notification, and that's sort of going by the wayside now. And so we really are driving, as a foundational component of Advanced Protection Program, that integration of two-factor authentication with the physical key. The other piece is that as you're using your Google accounts, again, to sort of further the day-to-day needs and actions of your organization, you're interacting with a lot of different apps. You're interacting with different apps that are either Google developed, third-party developed, and then verified so that we understand it's a trustworthy developer that's integrating with your accounts. But there's also a segment of apps that are not verified. And so as part of that Advanced Protection Program, should an unverified application try and access your account, we immediately block that. Again, this is trying to play towards a little bit of that action to take the burden off those campaign staffers who don't necessarily have that IT remit at the top of their mind for every day. The third piece that I think is really important here that's foundational to APP as well is something that I touched on a little bit at the beginning. It's very specific to a certain threat vector, and this is malware attempts that we see. So across, and Grace touched on this a little bit, across our products and surfaces, we already have a foundation of protections that exist. I think that Gmail phishing example is a really good one. But even beyond that, when you enroll in Advanced Protection, we elevate that security across each of those surfaces. So for example, when you're downloading an app from the Play Store, for example, we have something called Play Protect, which scans to make sure that that application is devoid of any malware or malicious file that would then permeate through your organization. Likewise, when you're taking advantage of our Chrome browser and you're downloading a file, as you can see in sort of that top right-hand corner when it's actually downloading, there's a malware scan that's occurring at that time as well. So whatever file you're potentially going to disseminate to your large organization is something that you know is secure. So that's Advanced Protection Program and sort of the foundational pieces there that I think really provide that elevated cybersecurity posture. And again, this is something free that we offer for your Google accounts. But I think what also is really interesting, and this is sort of the benefit of having these nuanced metastasizing threats in 2024 with respect to elections, is that this partnership, the ecosystem between industry, partners like DDC, and then campaigns, the users themselves, we get a lot of feedback to be able to then go back and create tools based off of really foundational research. And one example of that this year is our Account Securities Fundamentals, which is a simple click adoption of security policies within your workspace console. So we've had a number of years of research that has substantiated these security policies as their specific needs for campaigns. And so part of the adoption challenge that we've talked about is making sure that we don't want these campaign staffers to have to be those IT experts. We've taken care of that for you. And by going into your workspace console and simply clicking that adoption, you've elevated your security posture. So it really is a mix of the tools that we've already put out there for past election cycles, making sure we're selling those to campaigns and evangelizing those, if you will, to campaigns, but really taking their feedback as well and putting that to use in new tools and new technologies that we want to put in their hands.
Yeah, and there's information about that in your package as well. I'm going to come back to you, Grace, on something in a minute, but I want to go to Ben here, and anybody can comment on this. But Ben, we had this conversation about education and awareness when we were, when we met you before this panel, which was great to do. And you're familiar with this space, and you understand some of the hurdles about educating people around some of these things. So what are the biggest hurdles in raising awareness and motivating to take action in accounts? We have to work together. So if we're going to build resistance and resilience here, how are we going to do this? For the people in the audience who work every day with campaigns or work with folks in the political sector, how do we get them to pay attention to this issue?
I think in addition to the regulations that are out there that are sort of dealing with these issues, I think you kind of have to look at how do you change a culture, right? So you got to get people to really be ingrained in those security measures rather than making it a mandate or, hey, we got to go figure out what we're going to have to do for work, right? It's got to be part of the culture. I know at the Chamber we have a number of phishing attacks. The city of Dallas, the county of Dallas got hacked a number of times. A number of these big companies in Dallas have been had faced a number of these threats of cybersecurity. And so I think when you go and talk to those big businesses with a lot of resources that are facing the same issues that campaigns face, you kind of have to figure out how you're going to create that culture. How you're going to create, we just had our annual review and someone sent a phishing attack. It's crazy. So someone actually sent a phishing attack knowing that was going on in the organization. And then, our CEO had to send out a follow-up on that to say, hey, don't open that because that was obviously a phishing. So when you look at what's happening at campaigns on a number of levels, we've seen this in testimony at the federal level. There's a real and realized threat that's happening right now. And so I had the chance during South by Southwest to go talk to a couple of the CIA booth people that were over there and having those conversations with sort of the threats that they face on a national and international level. They're looking for all those types of people to help address these issues because changing a culture is very difficult, and even in an organization like the CIA, they have to go find people and bring them into the organization. And so the same thing I think happens with campaigns is how do you make a culture that really realizes those steps that you need to make sure that you're taking the necessary security measures to wave off those attacks.
Great. Matt, I want to ask you a question because I know you're doing some work in the area of having campaigns. We're talking about protecting campaigns from the outbound right here a little bit. But campaigns also engage in activities, and we know that everybody's saying, you got to use AI, right? Everybody's telling people, this cycle, you got to use AI. And I know you've been thinking about how campaigns can adopt AI both robustly and responsibly. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what's actually surprised us as we've been working with campaigns on this for almost 2 years now is there's actually a pretty robust sense of hesitancy amongst the campaign space to start using AI tools. I think a lot of this comes from a little bit of trauma after 2016 from campaigns. There was email compromises that were national news and embarrassing for campaigns. And since 2016 on the Democratic side, there's been a pretty robust effort to start embracing some very strong security measures around password managers and hardware keys and DDoS protection and things like that. And the pace at which AI tools are now coming onto the scene is so fast that there's almost like this little bit of fear and paralysis around is this okay for me to use? What is it doing with my data? Can I trust the data that it's providing to me? And so kind of around the idea of culture and education is we've found that the most productive way to lean in here is to actually show up and get campaigns using AI tools hands-on, get experience with them, use Gemini or Bard or ChatGPT or whatever you're interested in using, and start figuring out how does it play a role in the job that you do on your campaign or at your committee. Figure out what is it good at, but probably more importantly, figure out what is it not so good at so that you don't make an embarrassing mistake with these tools. In terms of things like data security, there's an appetite for people to just have a list of like approved and unapproved tools. We don't think that that's really feasible. We think that the space is going to continue to expand and grow. So instead, what we're doing is we're working with campaigns to help them do a little bit of independent vetting of the tools that they want to use. Does this AI tool even have a data policy posted anywhere on their website? Do they have anyone on staff that even appears to have expertise in machine learning or AI, or is this kind of like snake oil? We're working with campaigns to do a little bit of that upfront vetting. It sounds like the services offered by Google to like kind of validate apps could play a pretty strong role there. But we're really starting at the basics right now of how do you look at this tool and how do you come to it and say like, okay, I understand that this product by Adobe is probably something that I am comfortable using, and this product that I saw on page 6 of Product Hunt, I might need to dig into a little bit more. And then if you do have questions, who at your organization can help answer those questions? Do you have someone technical on staff that can help do that evaluation? If you don't, is there a committee that your campaign works with that you can escalate to and get that support to? All of these things are really being defined right now. We are telling campaigns that AI is probably not going to change how elections run in 2024, but AI is probably going to set the tone for campaigns this cycle, and going into 2026, this cycle is the standard that we're going to be utilizing going forward. So we want to do our best to get it right, and we set some pretty good norms on that.
So we're going to take questions in a couple minutes here, so if you have a question, formulate it. But Grace, I want to come back to you because the discussion of AI, you and Ryan both talked about kind of like what's in a product that's kind of forward-facing to consumers, right? Like, what I might see, right? In terms of, advanced protection, a key, those kinds of products. But I know that you're very passionate about kind of how, first of all, that to you, AI is not a new shiny object so much, as it is on the consumer-facing. And, how AI is really working under the hood for security or other arenas in Google to make that experience better, more secure, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think that's sort of we're oscillating between the two things where it's like, on the one hand, worries about how AI could be used for phishing or by bad actors, but on the other, I did want to, I'm glad you gave me a chance to talk about this, point to these reports that are on the tables for everyone, called the Defender's Dilemma. And basically the spirit of the part of the organization that I work in, and we work hand in hand with Ryan's team, we're not so much focused on necessarily like content policy, but we're really focused on like the hard cybersecurity of these systems, and two parts of that. How do you use AI to advance cybersecurity at scale and catch and prevent, or then catch and respond to bad actors faster than ever before? And then also really thinking about how do we make sure that as new AI tools are built, I think David said it's out in the wild, so like it's happening. New companies are springing up, and it's great. This is all ideas and innovation, but the same way like when you saw like the internet, it's like was built, like maybe it wasn't built with cybersecurity in mind. So now we've learned, and it's like, okay, hey, if we're going to scale up this new technology and have it used for designing recipes or this or that, whatever it is that code base, is it developed in a way that's using cybersecurity principles? So like those are the two things we're really thinking about. I will leave it to our threat experts on the first one because they've built these amazing scaled tools that help us catch and take action on bad actors. And one that I've been involved in because there is a partnerships component is something called cross-account protection, where if we catch an account hijacking activity on the Google platform, and you have used your Google account to sign into a third party, we can ping that third party in a privacy-preserving way that says suspicious activity alert, maybe you should take action. Prevents lateral attacks. You can imagine a world in which AI can help us scale this up like crazy, and then actually just one person or one company or one whoever catching a bad actor can benefit the entire ecosystem and prevent less harm to that individual. So like I get really excited about stuff like that. And then we did touch on like Frontier Model Forum and the Tech Accord in Munich. And one thing we're really leaning into now on the development of AI side is working with researchers, academia, industry partners to create some of these principles that people can take a look at as they're developing tools. Truly, even if it's a chatbot for, I just randomly picked recipes and that's like what your company does or something, you actually have some way to think about this, sort of like how you described trying to help campaigns like think about what AI tools to use. We're trying to create those guardrails and sort of support for people building these technologies. So it sounds a little squishy, but I'm really excited about it because we've got a bunch of different folks with different expertise coming around the table and trying to help prevent things like like a poison pill like approach inside of a large data set that can spread rapidly. So anyway, in that report, there's this concept of a digital AI-powered immune system. And I was like, that's really cool. We can actually use AI to respond as it sees these threats happening. So anyway, that's the two buckets that I think are really exciting.
I don't know if there are any questions, but I love the concept of the sort of the sharing of information about laterally across. I mean, when I started in cybersecurity, which was before the dawn of time, 2008, like most of you didn't even know cybersecurity was a word back then. I didn't when I took my first job in cybersecurity, by the way. I had no idea what it really meant. Information sharing was the holy grail.
Yep.
Right? And everybody's saying like, we'll never have information sharing. We can't have information sharing. How are we going to share information? And I think we've just come so far in that to think that people are thinking like, I can notify you of a vulnerability. I mean, we have a lot of that under the hood in things like websites and phishing, and there is a lot of information sharing about kind of that level, but the more we see that, the more we do build some form of immunization across. Yeah. Are there any questions? Oh, we got one down here.
Hi, this is Dan, the founder of AI Connects. We are like a global AI community. I just had event in Thailand and Singapore, and everybody is watching U.S. with this, coming up election, right? And I think it's great that we're talking about today. What do you see so far? I know that we're focusing on the U.S. this year, but everybody gonna be looking at what we do here this year as a good example of what others gonna be doing globally. And what do you see is this, what you have for Google is available globally as well? That's one question, right? And then is there any other like collaboration with what other campaigns are doing globally and sharing some example, good or bad as well? So just those two questions. Yeah.
Grace, you're probably the best one here to talk about the global perspective.
I'm happy to answer that, and thank you for asking it. Yeah, absolutely. So the products that, like for example, Advanced Protection is available globally. And this kind of came up in earlier conversations. So our team is global in remit and working on protecting high-risk users around the world. So we love Michael and the Defending Digital Campaigns team. This is our flagship partnership to secure campaigns in the US, but we have regional expert partners that we work with, organizations like Internews that actually has a Safer Journo program that trains and supports journalists in countries all around the world. There's an organization called Possible Digital. If you're looking across the EMEA region, they've been doing tons of trainings, support, making sure that folks understand in the campaign space, understand these tools we've been talking about and have the support they need. And we also just actually this year signed a partner called Asia Center that is working across over a dozen countries in the Asia Pacific. So yes, I think what's really interesting is there's always new insights. So for example, we've learned that in certain places, like if you're changing your SIM card frequently, a security key is not going to be the right option for like trying to bring that MFA where you go. Or folks working in, high-risk users aren't just specifically campaigns and elections, but could be people in conflict zones or things like that, where trying to find the right, built-in protections or easy protections for them is something that our partners are thinking about and give us feedback on. So it's really like a complex web, But I will tie it off with saying phishing still remains the #1 attack vector. So that is why we were so invested in advanced protection and so focused on the account security aspects, and that will be consistent, as well as these DDoS attacks, I think is another big one. So actually the Congressman's like first kind of best practices software, having strong authentication and just don't click on something you don't know what it is, that remains really universal despite all the nuances that we're seeing.
And that's because people are the target. I mean, we think of enterprise is the ultimate target, campaign's the ultimate target, but people are what are targeted to get in the door. That's why people are phishing, right?
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Any questions? Any thoughts? This is supposed to be the practicality panel, so maybe we've had a little practicality. But Matt, you and Ben, you've worked on campaigns. Something that the campaign probably is forgetting to do that they should be doing. That's easy to do. They could do it tonight if they wanted to.
Campaigns need to take up the free services that are offered to them through their tech partners. Most campaigns have such a tight budget that if you went to an organization and said, okay, I have a security tool for you and it works really well and it's $100 a month, they would say, I don't have $100 a month. So finding that price point actually isn't the right move. Figuring out how to get these into the hands of campaigns for free is how you get campaigns to say yes. And the good news is partners like Google, partners like DDC are offering a plethora of free services. And so actually, if I'm going into a campaign that's spinning up and it says, okay, I'm starting to think about cybersecurity, where do I start? My first answer is look at all the free things that you already get and let's start turning on those things. Turn on advanced protection. Get your, go get a password manager. Maybe that's baked into the browser you're already using. Go get your hardware keys. Go get your domain protection services that are available to you. I think a lot of campaigns just assume this is expensive and hard, and so really like pushing them to go turn on the free things that they already have is where I would start.
Any thoughts?
Just to piggyback on that, once you do have those tools, then the next step is obviously the implementation of it, right? And getting the culture and getting the organization or the campaign to actually utilize it in a real usable manner that's going to help protect the organization. So I think after obviously hitting that next step is to try to figure out how to integrate it into the operations of any organization or campaign to make it usable and make it practically integrated into the culture.
To Matt's point, I just have to give you some experience from DDC. So when I started DDC, we can offer free and reduced price services, right? Like you can discount to the campaign space through our FECAO. So I was like, great, we'll get some discounted services. Well, we got some discounted services. Adoption was 0. It was either free or no way. So, and it makes sense in a way, right? Because you alluded this to the beginning. Campaigns, they have one purpose in life, and that's winning, right? Winning. And so a dollar spent on anything that's not, leading to winning, it doesn't have to be security, it could be something else, right? Is a dollar that probably in their mind, maybe you know this because you've been on campaigns, might be considered to be misspent, right? And I think, I would never say spending money on security is misspent, so don't get me wrong there. But I can see how campaigns would look at that. And that's really why we exist, because that's the barrier to security, is the adoption of tools, and tools cost money, right? And some tools are pretty darn expensive, some are pretty cheap. And so being able to make those available is really for free, as well as extracting out of the platforms you use all the good stuff they have is, that's the easiest thing. We're basically out of time. I don't know if anybody has the last thought.
Actually, just to build off of that, and maybe tie a bow on that, I think part of the friction that we see when we try and provide these different tools to campaigns is obviously the price point and whether it's free and the dynamics at play there, but it's also this ease of adoption, right? We want to make sure these things are so easy to use that that's not, and even at the time to train you and update you and educate you on what this is going to do for you and your organization, those should be really quick, easy things to understand and then to integrate into your ecosystem. And so I think it's a little bit of both sides of that equation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Ease of adoption, because time is also the other resource that is end positive in a campaign, right? There is a hard stop, right? And we have a hard stop, perfect timing. So I just want to thank you, great panel, really a lot of expertise up here today. Thank you so much. I'm supposed to give the closing remarks, so I'll make them really quick. Thank you for coming. thank Google again for their amazing work in this space and their amazing partnership with us, for which we are eternally grateful. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you, Austin.